Then let's begin with the word of prayer. Father, there are many storms in our lives. We can't begin to count them. We don't know when they're coming, how violent they will be, how gentle they will be. But storms there are. Please, when these storms come, help to remind us of the peace that your Son brought us, that we may get through the storms in faith. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say that was a lovely prayer. Thank you very, very much, because you were talking about storms in life and relationships and everything else. And yesterday, my brother, I will sit down, just standing for just a minute. My brother and I, who get along very well, had a bit of a rough patch yesterday on some phone conversations. It wasn't pleasant. And poor Daniel was involved in that with me. And so my brother didn't want me to talk to him today. I don't think I might get emotional here. Didn't want me talking to him today, but I will be able to communicate with him tomorrow.
Okay.
And so perfect prayer.
Storm.
Your prayer was an answer to prayer.
We're going to start then with the Gospel of Mark. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Thank you. Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, and we'll begin with verse 35.
Once again, a reminder, if you read nice and loud for the camera.
Yes.
And for me.
And usually the masks are getting in your way for the hearing volume. Okay, someone?
4:35.
35 to 41.
Okay,
Yes.
Matthew chapter 4. I won't go that high. I only go to 25 on Matthew.
We'll try Mark 10.
Chapter 4. Okay, we'll try Mark.
You want me to read?
I got it.
Sure. Go
On
ahead.
that
Thank
day,
you.
when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leading the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
Okay. What strikes you? Yes, miss?
Okay, two things strike me. Oh, you want me to
Thank you,
pronounce
so we
that?
can hear.
You just told me a minute ago to put it back on. Okay, so back off now.
Okay.
Okay, two things strike me. One is that we had a bit of a storm, at least up at our house. We had quite a bit of rain last night and a storm, and here today we're reading about a storm. So again, it's kind of like your prayer was an answer to my prayer.
Okay.
Here we're talking about a story that we just recently saw happening in today's world. So we still have storms of life that come about and
Yes, we
strike us.
certainly do.
And often when we least expect it. And at least in the case with my brother's
Every
situation
other day.
yesterday. Anyway,
Yes.
so that's story.
Point
The other
two.
thing is having God be able to tell the storm to stop, and it stopped. Now, that doesn't always happen for us as humans. We always don't, well, it doesn't. It doesn't, John, I'm
It sure
sorry.
doesn't. It's no
I
doubt.
remember as a child, my dad actually had two farms for a while. One in Puyallup, which is the one we lived on, and one up in Enumclaw, which is, maybe a half hour away. And it was hard for him to sometimes have to drive back and forth. He had somebody that managed the one in Enumclaw, but he still would have to go up fairly often and check and see how things were doing under this other man's management. And there was an outside door pool at that time called Pete's Pool that when my dad would be helping with haying or things up there, my mom would go up to, and we kids could go over to Pete's Pool and swim while my dad was working on the second farm. And one summer, my mom liked the water and liked for us to be safe, but she had never learned to swim, so she didn't want to be in the water. And at that time, the rule at that pool was that the people not swimming or not sunbathing in swimsuits did not come inside the walls of the fence of the pool. So one day I was enjoying being in an inner tube in the pool, and I was in grade school, maybe 3rd grade, maybe 4th grade, in the inner tube on the inside of the fence in the wall. And I ended up being in an inner tube. When you get wet, inner tubes wet, what do? They get a little bit slippery on the old, in those days you actually used old inner tubes from real tires, not the kind of inner tubes you use now. Anyway, so I was in one of the inner tubes and it was wet, and my suit was wet, and I slipped through the inner tube. And I did not know how to swim well yet at all. And of course, I was in which end of the pool? Was I in the shallow end?
Deep end,
The
good.
deep end. And there were lifeguards, but they were far away from me. My mom saw me slip through. She knew I was in the deep end. She was on the outside of the pool. I was on the inside. She was terrified as a parent that I would drown. And then they talk about drowning here. Was Jesus concerned?
Mhm.
And so my mom was terrified I was going to drown. So you have to know my mom and her history. And
I'm glad that
She-
she was successful in getting you out somehow.
she did.
Let's pause there, okay?
It's a really good end to the story.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
I'm kind of getting a different interpretation a little bit here, where for me, I'm seeing how this is extremely fearful for everybody, where they're all like in a place where it's the most frightening thing, and Jesus is sleeping. It's calmly, you know what I mean? So for me, it's a faith thing, a reminder of what faith we should try to strive for. Like if we could have the type of faith that God does in those times that we have the most fearful things happening to us, in life, that we can rest like Jesus in that, knowing that the outcome will be what it's supposed to be.
So you're seeing it from the perspective of Jesus asleep, and he had so much faith in his Father and in who he was to be asleep.
Yeah, to just
Okay.
like not even to notice the waves or
Interesting.
or any of it.
No ear problem, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else notice something? Something strikes you, yes? No?
Well, one of the things that I see, of course, this storm came up, and this is not unusual for anybody who's been out on the water a lot. But they say a fierce gale of wind. Now, we have a very specific terms for what constitutes a gale, but it's a strong storm. It's going to have big waves and all of that. And these guys were in a small open boat. They would legitimately have to worry about, number one, will the boat stay together? Number two, will it keep the water out?
Or will it just not flip over or
Yeah.
whatever?
And you
Yeah,
saw what those boats were like.
that's
last
true.
week.
Yeah.
Saw that last week. Okay, very good. Anything else? All right, then let's go on to the Gospel of Luke. Chapter 8, beginning at 22. And let's see if Luke does anything different with this story. Luke 8, 22 through 25.
Okay, I'll take that.
Okay?
One day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and started out. As they sailed across, Jesus settled down for a nap. But soon a fierce storm came down on the lake. The boat was filling with water, and they were in real danger. The disciples went and woke him up, shouting, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and the raging waves. Suddenly, the storm stopped and all was calm. Then he asked them, "Where is your faith?" The disciples were terrified and amazed. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "When he gives a command, even the wind and waves obey him." And
Go ahead.
I always get
Chills.
chills when I read this story.
Well, that's just because of the wind
Yeah.
and the waves, and you know when you get wet. Anything strike you different here in this version? Anything that's any substantial or minor differences?
Well, they pointed out that they had a destination.
Good, they do have a destination. Doesn't say what it is yet, but we'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Well, this is a, where is your faith?
Where is your faith?
Yeah.
Now that's interesting.
And like, where are we when we have a storm?
Where is your faith?
Yeah.
In this context, what was their faith supposed to be in? What were they supposed to have faith in?
God's promise
What promise would that be, though?
that he would follow through with what he started.
Pushy here. What had he started that he was going to follow through on? Getting them across the lake?
Delivering him to the other side.
Okay,
Well, I think their faith, he's asking them to have faith in him.
yes, in Jesus himself.
Mhm.
And why would that be a problem? He's asleep, he's happy, he's content, he's satisfied. What do they think they're going to do? Drown when he's there with them in the boat?
That's
Well,
exactly what they think.
Well, he's sleeping, he's not paying any attention.
He doesn't have to. As long as they know that God's not going to kill Jesus, they're okay. Well, unless they get washed overboard, of course.
But even if they did, they would be safe.
Yes, well, true. But they don't know that yet.
It's like taking that roller coaster when you start to go down and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to fly out. And then you get to the bottom and you're going back up and you're like, wow.
Or the ones that drop, yes. Yeah, don't quiver. Don't quiver now. Okay, so good. Anything else in this or interpretation that you can give me a sense of something? Thank you.
I think for me, in talking and in hearing and reading this, again, kind of piggyback on what you were saying there, is that I think that Jesus expected them to have faith not only in him, but in God the Father. Again,
Yes.
we're not talking about the triune God.
Yes.
That Jesus was there in the boat with them in the human God in human form. That God the Father was there watching out for them. And the Holy Spirit should be
Good.
residing within them.
But this is so early in the ministry, okay? They didn't know that Jesus had this God aspect to him.
Yeah, well, okay, you got the point.
They have a man asleep there, a rabbi, a teacher, and he's done a lot of good things, but they really don't know that he can handle nature, apparently, because they, even though, who is this guy? Okay?
This is showing us to have faith.
It is. That's exactly what it's going to show us. Okay, finally, let's go to the Gospel of Matthew and see what he does with this. Matthew chapter 8. See, now we're right there before you can. 18 to 27.
You said Matthew?
Matthew.
$18, you said?
18 to 27. Chapter 8.
Want me to read it?
Sure.
Now when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And the scribe came up and said to him, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Another of the disciples said to him, Lord, let me first go and bury my Father. But Jesus said to him, Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by... The pages are stuck together. Swamped
Thin
by the
paper.
waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, Save, Lord, we are perishing. And he said to them, Why are you afraid, O men of little faith? Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, What sort of man is this, that even winds and sea obey
Okay, thank you. Anything strike you different in Matthew's version of this?
Well, the beginning of this, you had some things leading up to this that we had not heard before.
Correct, they were neither in Mark nor Luke.
And so, of course, Jesus having no place to stay,
He was homeless.
yeah, that's one part of it, although he slept somewhere.
But he also, remember, lived in Capernaum.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we'll get to that.
But,
Go ahead.
okay, and then, of course, you go on to, well, let me first go bury my father. Well, in my mind, he probably meant a funeral procession and, probably an extended period of time.
Right, I would think so.
And it does seem out of character for Jesus to say, don't do that, just come follow me and forget about.
Interesting. Why would he say that? What is the point of saying what he said? What did he want this man to learn? What did he want us to learn?
Well,
Okay.
so we know that Jesus was there only for a short time.
Correct.
And in order to fulfill his ministry, he had to get moving.
Okay,
He
yeah.
had to get on with it.
Okay.
And that is probably the reason behind it. But in addition to that, though, normally you think of Jesus as being
Patient.
exceedingly,
Yes.
yeah. He meets people where they are.
Okay.
And you don't read that here.
Right.
I'm going to go back to the boat where everybody's frightened again, and I think that this guy was wanting to go and bury his father, and then he wasn't seeing that God had him already.
Okay. Oh, okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like he was,
The body getting gotten rid of is not that big a deal.
yeah, what was important
Spirit's
was that
already
he had
gone.
been saved like
Yeah.
they were in the boat.
Okay. How about, yes?
I would kind of piggyback on what Daniel is saying.
Good.
Because I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Not everybody's taking this up. You're picking
I
up.
want to hear you.
Okay, I know. Not everybody is understanding of the fact that the man wanted to go and bury his father. And it just takes me back to when my own dad died.
And that was important to you?
It would be important to
Okay.
me to be like that man and want to go pay my respects.
And what would
Very much.
Jesus be saying to you?
He would be saying to me, your father is already with me.
Thank you.
All that is left in that casket or in that church or in that
It's
urn
not
Right.
important.
are the remains. It's not important anymore. He's not there.
But-
He is with me.
But of course, in this society,
Yeah.
there's a serious pressure on the male
Yeah.
to send the parent off.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Those are all wonderful points, of course, but I've also heard this explained that what he was actually saying was, I'm going to wait until my dad dies before I commit to this. And Jesus is saying, today is the day of salvation. Today is when you need to make your decision and act on it.
Has anybody ever had a decision they had to make and it kind of ended up being a couple of years before you could make it because you just didn't want to get around to it?
You mean like retirement?
No, I didn't know. We all have faced that, haven't we? Where you're supposed to make a decision and you go, provocate, whatever the right word is there. Procrastinate, okay. In hoping that the decision will be made for you or something. I don't know, maybe Jesus is saying, when the time comes, you need to make the decision, and the time is now. Maybe, okay. Yes, miss?
Okay, Dave, do you want to tell this part of the story, or do you want me to, of the night that you got the call, we were talking to Daniel about it from Bill, and wanting money, you want to?
Before that, I'm going to have to stop for a second. We need to get to this historical aspect,
Okay.
and then we'll come back to that.
Let's wait till later.
Keep it in your mind. First thing I have to do is show you where places are, okay? Last week, they were here at the Cove. Okay, let me bring that up for you here. There's that cove.
Thank you, that's much easier to see.
Yeah. And in that cove, he was teaching, and there were the three things on the side, so he was out in the boat, and da-da-da-da, okay? the parable of the soils and stuff like that. Now he's saying, let's go to the other side of the lake. Okay, let me get that out of the way. The other side of the lake, isn't that down here?
Well, it might just be across the.
Or could it be down here? Or could it be over here? Where is the other side of the lake? It's vague. But that's okay, because we know where he ends up, okay? It turns out he wants to go up here, northeast of there. So he wants to leave the cove here, go past Capernaum, and he wants to go up here to Bethsaida fishing village. He just wants to go up there, and I'll explain that in a little while, okay? That's the goal. That's where he wants to go, is up toward Bethsaida, where some of the disciples do live, okay? Any question about just the physics of the physical aspect of that?
I
Yes.
would like to know approximately how far it
Okay.
is, some people give distance in miles, I prefer it in time. How
Okay.
long would it take me to get in a boat from point A to point B?
Okay, there is 1 mile.
Depends on the storm.
Yeah.
Shush, shush, shush,
That's a
shush.
good point, Ann.
So it would be 1, 2, about 2.5 miles up the coast.
Okay, thank you.
That's all it was. It's a very simple little thing.
Little John.
Unless
But
you're
they don't have
against
a motor,
the,
they're rowing, right?
Well, they do row. They definitely didn't have a motor unless it was the wind.
Right.
They did have sails, which I'll show you in a little while. Anything else?
well, in those days, they couldn't tack against the wind.
They didn't know anything about tacking against the wind. That is correct. They're going to go with the wind, wherever it is. Okay, let's get started. After the morning had passed, and it was late afternoon, Jesus decided to leave the crowds he had been teaching in the cove west of Capernaum. Now, I'm going to bring this up for you, for those who haven't seen it already.
Where are you at in the Bible reading?
I am not.
Oh,
This
okay,
is his
sorry.
paraphrase.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank
Okay,
you.
here is Capernaum here, and if you go west of Capernaum, this is that little cove I was pointing out where they would park the boat, and he would then preach there. This is where let's not get into minor detail, but this is where he was, and he's going to want to cross Capernaum and head off, okay? And to go across the lake towards the east to the quiet fishing village of Bethsaida, a couple of miles south of the capital of that region, Bethsaida Julius. Now let me help you with this one more time here on this map. The fishing village makes sense to have it right there next to the water, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But your capital doesn't want to be next to the water in case the water rises or whatever. So the capital city itself, Bethsaida Julius, was just north of that by about a mile. It's an archaeological site. We know where it is. Okay? And this was the capital of that region to the northeast of the Sea of Galilee. Any question about that? Okay. They're going to head up here toward the fishing village. In my opinion, they were headed toward Bethsaida, we know that. Okay? All right. The plan was to fish while crossing the lake. Where do you get your best fishing? Fishermen?
Well, so with the outlet of the stream, it'd be a good
Outlet. That's right. So if they were to cross up here, right here, where the northern part of the Jordan River comes down and dumps in, this is prime fishing territory.
So it's kind of like at the mouth of the river where are the fish wanting to go up the river?
No, the river is bringing nutrients down,
Okay.
and they're snacking on them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
That helps me. Thank you.
So most fishermen know this already, and they try to get to that. Well, they're going to cross this area while fishing and land at the fishing village, okay, and process things. So let's go on with that.
Now, one more question from me.
Sure.
I'm not a fisherman, so can any of you
Okay.
guide me along the way here? So I understand now that the fish are waiting for the food at the mouth of the river.
Yes.
The fishermen are coming to where the fish are. In those days, they mainly fished with their nets, correct? They weren't fishing with any kind of
Correct.
lines.
Definitely nets.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, here we go then. Fishermen often used the beach area near Bethsaida as a place to process their catch. This is what it looked like. That's that specific area. You pull your ship up, you hop out, trudge through the mud, and you unload your fish.
So is that like the stuff in the forefront, John, is that like logs or is it garbage or?
Well, yes, any lake you go to, you're going to find material washed up on shore.
Okay, okay.
And so some of that. But this is the general area. Bethsaida Julius is back up here.
Up the hill?
Yeah.
Or at the bottom of the hill?
Not, it's right over here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? That's where the capital is located. Okay? This is the area, not guaranteed, this was the water level. This is the area where I proposed there was the fishing village, where you process your fish, haul the fish up to the capital, and sell it. You want to do that locally if you possibly can. The fish are fresh, it's ready for people. Okay? So you're going to fish along the way, and you head up toward this area. Any question, thought, or comment? Selling the catch in Bethsaida Julius in the morning and afternoons, and to clean and mend their nets. Okay, here we go. The boats sailed across the lake where the disciples fished as they went. The fish would be rising after the heat of the day. They get a little hungry after the day is over. Evening fishing is certainly a reasonable thing to do. Jesus was tired and quickly fell into a deep sleep on the platform across the back of the boat. And this is what that is believed to look like. This is a model of a ship that they had uncovered during a low time with the lake.
So is that the whole boat, or
No,
is
this is
the
just
halfway of the boat, or?
this is the back half of the boat.
Okay, thank you.
There's a platform area here. This is the
Okay, I
area
see
where they
that.
would stand to row,
Okay.
and fish would be dumped into this area back here. But he was up here on a cushion, sleeping. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, always have questions.
Yeah.
Questioning minds want to know these things. So I got the layout of the boat.
Good,
Talking about how tired he is after, a night of fishing, got that.
good.
And we talked earlier, in some of the verses earlier, it talked about that he didn't have a place to live or to hang out. They had no nest of his own, so to speak, to Jesus. So where was he living all this time that he was traveling for 3
He was
years?
living in Capernaum with Peter, or in Peter's house complex. Remember when he took care of his
Dave
mother-in-law?
kind of was telling me, you touched on this before, but I wasn't.
Yeah,
aware,
it was
so.
early. But yes, he did have a place to live, and it was apparently in Capernaum.
Okay, and Peter's family was who?
What?
I mean, I know who Peter is, but he
We
was
know
like a wife and
of his, we know of
children.
his mother-in-law who was ill, and
Was
she is
there.
healed. Therefore, he probably had a wife, maybe a child or two even. It's always possible.
You don't know, though, we don't know.
Oh, no, there's no record of that.
Yeah.
We know he had a mother-in-law, so therefore he had to have a
One
wife.
yeah.
Okay. Down from the north through the pass came the wind. You have to understand, this is the focal area here. The wind would come out of the north. Let me show it to you. Let me get off of that. Here they are crossing over. They get down here and the wind comes smack into them. Okay? Driving them off course because they can't tack. They don't know about doing all that. And they can't row hard enough because the wind is too strong. So they drop the sail and get buffeted. They're getting water being blown over the ship, the boat, etc. Do you understand that? Okay. Notice the position where they are. They were going across here from the cove. Let me see if I can bring it up for you. From the cove, they were crossing over, heading for Bethsaida, and the wind came up. Okay?
And I understand it's pretty common and the waves can get pretty
Choppy.
choppy.
Let's call it that. I'm sure Ken could give us great insight into the wind and the waves. It picked up quickly. Soon, the power of evil blew the boat off course southward, while the waves threw water into the boat. The men fought the wind and waves until the boat was threatened and the situation desperate. They were off course, partly swamped, near the eastern shore of the lake. There seemed to be no end in sight. They were going down. Now again, I'll bring this to you. They were blown off course southward by the wind, and it was driving them toward the southeast. Because we know where they ended up later in the next story. So we know this is where they're going to end up. So we know the basic course they ended up being driven on. And let's get rid of that then. Any question, thought, or comment, please?
Well, you said the power of evil. You know, it's like in our own lives. Sometimes we'll be going along and we've got our plans and wham! Something or someone just really,
Yeah.
gets us off course.
Yes.
It just reminds me, like you were saying, Anne, that you think you're going one way, one direction one day, and then all of a sudden some kind of catastrophe happens. And in my thinking in the last few days, Deanna, if you don't mind my saying, I, of course, always think about the day that you lost Cindy in the lake. And how you didn't know anything was coming that day, just like when our younger son Bill passed away, we didn't know anything was going to happen on that trip home from Mississippi, and your life changes forever.
But what we're looking at here is a diversion from your course. We usually think of God as controlling our lives and being all good and bad. They didn't think that way. The storm was evil. There's a reason for that.
Did they think God was part of that storm or part of that world?
Well, God allowed it, certainly.
Yeah.
But there was evil in this lake area thing that they worked. And I'll explain that to you in a little while. But this was an evil thing trying to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
It was making their life very dangerous. And I think that let's keep that in mind from their perspective, not ours. Go ahead. Nothing? Okay.
The thing that I keep coming back to in my mind, and this was pointing of notice for me, is how badly designed after all that time their boats were. And it seems to me if you were fishing on a lake and trying to make a living, you would have more knowledge and it seems to me the way they designed their boats didn't give them any protection from storms and that you would have thought they would have figured out a design that might have helped keep some of that water out. You're on a lake,
Sure.
crying out loud. You're not out in the middle of the ocean, which is different.
If they built their boats wider out, they'd have had more stability, I'm sure, but they didn't.
Yeah.
You know, and therefore, they know of people who have died in the lake.
Yeah.
Friends, businessmen, whoever, you know. So it adds to that respect or fear. It's really fear of this lake.
Even today, fishing is considered a hazardous occupation. Now, I'm not talking about the recreational guy that goes out with the good weather, but throughout history, there have been many mariners that have been lost that were out fishing.
Yeah.
It should be no surprise to us that 2,000 years ago they had the same problem.
Agreed. So just stay in their situation while we're going through this. Remember that. Okay, here we go. The disciples decided to wake the sleeping Jesus. And with real terror in their voices, they quickly informed him of the situation. What shall we do? Though these were men who daily drew their livelihood from the lake, it was not a comfortable relationship. The lake was considered a place of evil.
Can you
Remember, these were
expand on that a little bit?
a desert people originally, and they came up from that perspective. And water was scary. Okay? Remember, none of them had ever been to YMCA and learned to swim. Okay? They might struggle through it, but they just were not comfortable in there. This is especially true for the majority who could not swim well. To drown in the lake, and this is what you want to remember, would send your spirit to an evil place. That was their perspective. You want to die and be buried, near Jerusalem, for example. What you don't want to do is be drowned. it's evil. Evil lurks in the lake, you might say, and has drawn this wind to take you out.
Well, also your remains would remain in the lake if you died.
Yeah, because no one's going to be able to fish you out.
You've got a lot of authors in classical writing that have used that very description.
Yes.
Dante's Inferno uses that analogy. I was just thinking of a recent writing in Harry Potter, the latter couple of books. They use water to demonstrate evil.
Yes.
And the evil spirits within the water. So it's, I can understand very clearly that perception, because you don't know what's down there. I was watching a National Geographic show, and they talk about the only place we know more about the moon
than we do about the ocean.
Yes,
depths.
so we're finding
Yeah.
what's down there. So yeah, it's very logical.
And I would call you, just for general information, you'll find out later in another story, just how evil they felt this lake was. Yes.
And it's a superstitious thing too, and this
Okay.
sounds very trite, but it really brings it home, I think. In the movie Peter Pan, at least.
Go ahead.
What part of Peter Pan?
Yeah. What's her name? The little Indian princess is there.
There is no
There's-
path through the happy hunting ground
To the path
through
of,
the water.
yeah,
There we go.
happy hunting ground through water.
Okay,
yeah,
so be aware of this fear of something that they live with daily. They are not comfortable. Did you? Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, the concern whether if you're a child and you're swimming in a lake, you worry about what your feet are going to touch if it's murky water. to get back to the end of my story, which fits in with this
Okay,
totally, I'm
go
going
ahead
to
now.
give the end now, the rest of the story. My mom is terrified on the outside of the lake, or the pool because of the fence. And I was slipped through and I couldn't, I didn't know how to swim and I was sinking to the bottom. And I could feel the bottom of the pool, but my head was underneath water and I was
Right.
starting to swallow the water. And I could all of a sudden very clearly, just like sometimes we could hear God speak to our hearts and know what direction we're going to hear, I could hear my mother's voice screaming seriously, true story, I'm not making it up, screaming at the top of her lungs, and trust me, my mother was a very good screamer, because on the farm you would have to yell so you could be heard from the farmhouse to the barn. So she was screaming totally, Irma, Irma, getting my attention first by name, and she goes, walk to the shallow end. And she would scream that over and over again, Irma, walk to the shallow end. And it was an old-fashioned pool. I mean, I was born in 1950, so we're talking mid-50s here. And it was very much just one slant thing.
Sure.
And I could feel that with my feet. And so I saved myself. I walked to the shallow end, just like my mother told me to do.
Interesting.
And finally, as I was getting close to the shallow end, is when the lifeguard finally showed up. Who had been on the other side.
Well, they
But
were.
I mean,
she was calling you, not the lifeguard.
That was very
Okay. All right. Let's see then. Anything else that strikes you? Save us, they pleaded. In the face of this lifelong fear, they only thought of Jesus as a miracle worker, which is what he had been doing up to this point in his ministry. Okay? So they want him to do a miracle thing. Save us. Question, thought, or comment? Upon being awakened, Jesus assessed the situation and then told the disciples to relax. Yeah, right. Don't worry. Be at peace. Okay? Then he calmly faced the north into the power of the wind and ordered it to calm down. And the wind died down and finally quit blowing. Any thoughts on that?
Try it. It'll work for you.
I don't have that authority, thank you.
Yeah,
I
me either.
can't quite. However, I do remember back in the days when I had the bathtub and I'd get it rocking good, I would put my hands on it and it would calm the waters eventually because they barrier against it. I know how it works, but I tried. Yes?
Another thing, you're talking about different storms in our lives, that it's not always a windstorm.
No.
Sometimes it's other catastrophes or natural disasters. I'm sure all of us in this room, I bet, how many of you have been through an earthquake?
Oh,
I'm sure you guys have in California. You know, we have here in the Northwest too. Dave has a funny one that has to do with Seattle area. My funny one is here I grew up out in Puyallup, but I went to Fife High School, which is close to the freeway there. One of the earthquakes, we were in gym. And in early, again, when I was in high school in the mid-60s, boys and girls did not do PE together. In our gymnasium at our school, there was a big curtain that could be dropped down, and the boys could be doing their gym class on one side of the curtain, we'd be on the other side. The earthquake happened, and on the girls' side of the gym, we assumed that those stupid boys on the other side were just shaking the whole gymnasium. That was the initial thing until our teacher realized that it was an earthquake and got us underneath some of the archways.
But oftentimes, at least where I'm from, those storms were real. The earthquakes were real. You can go to Florida and enjoy the wind blowing in a hurricane. You can go to Oklahoma and enjoy the rapid wind blowing of a tornado. These storms are real in the physical world, and in our lives, these storms are real. And we have to face them. The question is, how do you face the storm? Because the storm in your life is going to bring this kind of response. What do I do? And if I can't figure out a way to do something, I want someone to help me. And my faith in Jesus and in the Father, that's what I'm going to depend on. Go.
Well, my experience with that was when I was at the high school. I was still in EMT, and what was interesting was the misconception about life in an earthquake.
Okay.
And the part I played was that, and the nurse picked me out because of my skills, was to be at the place in the outside where they would bring the bodies and assess them. And my skill training told me that when we talk about frame of time, it would let a body or a person could live with serious injuries and what we had to work with.
Okay.
Everyone assumed that there would be no death, that there would be immediate help, there would be immediate saving of life, flying out to a hospital.
Okay.
What I told them, the kids brought them in and stuff, and we talked about it later too, was the immediacy. Again, what can I do? And what I started doing, I kept watching my watch. I said, this person's been here X number of times, they had this kind of, I started covering them.
Sure.
And the kid under the blanket said, I'm dead. I said, yes. I said, over here, same thing. The point being was their unfamiliarity with the fact of the seriousness of what a storm can do in a time frame. And that fear of the unknown is immense.
Oh yeah, and that's what we've got here. The water, the lake is an unknown evil. And that's just got them gone. Yes, miss?
Took it off just for you,
Yep.
John. In talking about evil and storms and how life can change in an instant, we of course recently not celebrated, but we honored the death of all those during 9/11. And they had a number of specials on, and I chose to record some of them because part of it was a little too graphic for William to be watching.
Okay.
So I would watch it later. And even watching it later, and sometimes Dave would be in bed because he was tired and needed to be lying down. So I'd be out there watching it myself. And part of it brought me back to my childhood where I used to be afraid of some of the scary movies that used to be around in the mid-50s. And again, in the movies, it's pretend. And even some of the mid-50s movies were so fake-looking, you knew
You laugh,
it was
yes.
pretend. You could almost laugh because it wasn't as real. But in 9/11, when you have planes crashing into tall buildings, when you have people trapped in fire and rubble, and you have people thinking, are we above the crash site, or with the one in the building or below, and people jumping out windows, and all of that. I mean, like Dave is saying, it's hard for people to imagine that real life terror is indeed real.
Okay, so now we know the situation for these disciples. It's a real danger. Okay? Jesus then encouraged the disciples. Oh, by the way, stopping a storm, yeah, I can't do that either. None of us can, I think. Never mind. Then Jesus encouraged the disciples to have greater faith. Okay? There would be many storms in their lives. In the face of evil, be calm and confront it in faith. But the disciples were awestruck. Here was the awesome power of God as spoken of in the Psalms. Huh? Psalm 107. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distresses. He caused the storm to be still, so that the waves of the sea were hushed. They would be aware of the psalm. And it's exercised by Moses at the Red Sea. Exodus 14. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. Moses had that authority. God has the authority. Wow, this guy we're with seems to have that authority too, to control the environment. This now, that power of God has been displayed as they had never seen it before. This amount of authority surprised the disciples. Who is this guy, really? They didn't know. Remember, this is a moving picture for 3 years, not a still picture at all. It's included. It's they learn as they go along. Okay? Any thoughts, comments, or questions? Yes?
Gosh, can you tell I'm excited to be back, John?
Yes, I am.
I'm
quite
I just
aware
want
of
to
it.
tell everybody I can't tell you how excited I am.
Come on.
Okay, so here we go. I always liked the movie with the parting of the Red Sea. And
That would be with what's
imagine-
his name?
Charlton Heston.
Heston, there we go.
I always liked that movie, although parts of it were scary to me.
Mm.
Again, as a child, I was afraid a lot as a kid. But thinking what it would be like as that Red Sea parts and the dry ground appears and the Israelites are starting to go, are you kidding? They're calling me to go.
In the middle of that?
They're calling me to go out in the middle of that. Who is this that is calling me to do
Right.
that? Will I survive? Can
Yes.
I be brave enough? Will my children survive?
Can I collect fish as I walk?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Can I be-
Sorry, I apologize.
But thinking how
Uh-huh.
their thought processes
Yes.
must have been, and then I always was, I don't know if fascinated is the right term, but once the Israelites cross that Red Sea and the waters don't stay apart anymore, the waters come rushing back faster and faster and deeper, and maybe it's because I almost drowned as a kid in the pool, I don't know. But
You learn to walk.
yes, I learned to walk, and I would have run across the Red Sea. But watching all the Egyptians
Uh-huh.
losing their lives because they would not listen to God's advice to them through
Right.
the Israelites. I mean, it's a fascinating
Yes.
historical study.
And it's the power of God.
Yeah.
Okay, any other thought, comment, or
The
question?
only other thing that pops in my head at that point is the difficulty that the disciples had in learning to have faith. That God continued, or Jesus, to test them, continued to love them, continued to work with them, but it was very difficult for them to simply trust their faith. And then I think about that in terms of my own life and how long a journey and path I've been on for 70 plus years, and how how my faith's been tested over and over, and I strongly believe in that. Why? So they're no different. I mean, they're it's hard to overcome this
Some of the fears.
yeah, and just let it go and say, okay, I trust you, do my life. And yeah, it's, I think of the suddenness. I think like Kim's probably, you probably can relate to this better than anybody else in the room about how quickly, when you're on a body of water, you're out there, you're having an idyllic time on your boat, and there's a
All of a sudden
possibility
the storm
of a
comes.
storm, and all of a sudden, you've lost track of that time that that storm hits. And, you have to be prepared, but if you aren't, you're gonna get in trouble. But getting back to my original point, how difficult it was for the disciples to gain that trust in their faith. And how important
And
it was.
everybody in this room has had to do that.
Yeah,
At one time or another.
At one time or
Some
another.
people more in their life than others.
You faced reality, might be threatening your child, a relative, friend, with their life,
And the quick death that.
or a
can happen.
slow death. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Faith is for you, yes.
And this whole thing today bothers me because my daughter drowned in Lake Stevens a few years ago from over the way.
So this is very personal.
How long ago, Dan?
12 years.
12 years ago.
At least, well, never mind. We have it different now because we have the Lord who has given us the guidance to have the faith that it's not a problem anymore. It's the departure that's the problem.
Just listening to everybody, I wonder if we would have the faith that we have if we hadn't had it under test.
No.
Yeah, the
You know what I mean?
test.
So I'm getting that word learning thing again and again. It's like, how is it that we're learning this? And the necessity of that learning is coming through all of those tests. So, I mean, is faith really real if you're not tested?
It isn't. It's how do you sharpen a knife? You take a rough edge to sharpen it. Stone.
I just want to direct my comments not only to all of us together,
Okay.
but especially to you, Deanne. I've been fully aware that as we talk about the lake and the darkness of the lake, that this probably was a difficult session for you. But I want you to know and remember, of course, I'm going to get teary here. I want you to know how much as your church family, we love you and care about you and realize how difficult it was for you to lose Cindy. I remember going to Cindy's funeral after the difficultness of you and Kenny standing by that lake all night waiting for Cindy's body to be found. And how difficult that was. And how beautiful, beautiful, beautiful her service was. Cindy was a branch manager for our local bank. Wells Fargo, I don't know if it was Wells Fargo in those days, but whatever the term was, it's Wells Fargo Bank now. But she was so popular and such a beloved individual in our community
well, you can't.
that they couldn't hold her service here at Ebenezer. They had to hold it up at the high school. And it was a beautiful service. And poor Deanne had been in the hospital, and they had to bring her from the hospital for her own daughter's funeral, as I recall. I think I have the details correct. It was a horror.
So-
Faith, and Cindy had tons of faith.
And that's the thing. She had the faith.
Yeah,
This is something we have,
yeah,
the disciples did not have.
yeah. They
We
didn't
can
have
look
it.
back on what the Lord has brought us. He brought us the faith. So we don't have to be concerned about that. The process and the loss, yes.
Yeah,
But the faith,
yeah.
she's fine.
9
We're-
over 30 years.
Yeah, we're okay.
I just think that.
Yes.
I just think that way you phrase that about faith is so beautiful because it's each of us arrives at that point differently, but once we have that faith, it's just a wonderful gift. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean,
It's the
getting me
it's the
when I've
calm of
lost
the
loved-
storm.
Yeah, when I've lost loved ones, that's what I always come back to.
Yeah. It's the calm of the storm. We thank the Lord for this one. All right, anything else?
I have something.
Go ahead.
Can you be sure to say one of your special prayers at the end here for us before we
I
depart?
can't understand your words.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm just saying, I know you were always Mr. Punctual. I was 30 seconds late, I'm sorry. I want to make sure we leave enough time before we close, because you like to be punctual, that we have you, or ask you to please say a special prayer that we continue to grow in our faith, realizing that we are with God and that He keeps us always.
Well, then I thank you for the prayer you just offered.
Yeah.
I don't have to say it.
Okay.
All right, next week. Oh, he's going to cast out legion.
Oh, this is the pig thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.